Welcome back to another episode of The Year in Power, Protest, and Consequence. I'm your host, and today we're going to journey through a significant year of political maneuvering and social challenges under President Donald Trump. Through a single magazine timeline, we'll uncover the ways in which these events coalesce around themes of power, foreign policy, protest, and public accountability.
That's right. We'll take you through major events that shape the political landscape, highlighting their importance and how they resonate today. It's fascinating to see how one year can set the stage for changes that reverberate through generations. We have a lot to unravel, so let's get started.
Let's begin in late March, shall we? In the timeline, there's a striking entry where an executive order introduces a 25% tariff on goods from any country importing Venezuelan oil. Now, at first glance, this might seem like just a technical trade decision, but really, it wields significant political clout, right?
Absolutely. Tariffs are tools that can be used not only to influence trade, but also to apply pressure on nations, particularly those that are already facing U.S. sanctions, like Venezuela. This action signifies the Trump administration's broader strategy of weaponizing trade to exert its influence globally.
Exactly. It's worth noting that shortly after this, the president announced a 10% tariff on all imports in April. This was framed as a form of economic liberation while simultaneously unsettling international trade relationships. So here we see tariffs functioning not just as economic adjustments, but as essential rallying points for political support domestically.
And by the end of April, the timeline highlights a deal with Ukraine for shared investment in rare earth mining. Rare earth elements are crucial for modern technology, and their strategic relevance can't be understated. Consider how intertwined economic interests are with national security. This is economic diplomacy at its finest.
Right. We see this pattern where economic tools like tariffs and investment funds are used not just to manage markets, but also to influence allies and counter rivals. Tariffs, as you mentioned, are often about more than just dollars and cents. They're about shaping global power dynamics.
Moving into May and June, the focus shifts inward as we see domestic policies take center stage. For instance, in May, the administration limited refugee admissions and turned away asylum seekers from countries like South Africa. This represents a shift in America's traditional welcoming stance towards refugees and hints at broader policy changes concerning immigration.
And amidst these discussions about immigration, we see personal diplomacy play out too, like when President Trump entertains South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. These relationships show how high-level political interactions can have personal dimensions that impact international policy.
Yet, as we delve into the domestic unrest, we also see military involvement on American soil. The timeline mentions the deployment of the National Guard to Los Angeles during protests. This immediately raises questions about the balance between maintaining public order and the right to dissent. What does this mean for civil liberties?
This is a critical point. The use of military force during domestic protests can blur the lines of governance and can potentially undermine the democratic processes that allow for peaceful assembly and protest. Just days later, we see moves to rename military bases that previously honored Confederate leaders, a symbolic shift that acknowledges racial reckonings.
So we have these simultaneous narratives: domestic protests triggered by systemic racism and the legacy of the Confederacy occurring alongside international tensions, like military strikes and confrontations with Iran. This ties back to how presidential decisions radiate outwards and resonate on many levels.
As we cross into late June, the narrative grows even more intense. The timeline marks President Trump's order for airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, a significant escalation in the U.S.-Iran tensions. It's sobering to see how diplomacy gives way to military action so rapidly. How do we reconcile these evolving relationships?
And concurrently, we watch as the administration announces the shutdown of the Agency for International Development, or USAID. This organization has historically provided humanitarian assistance and development projects worldwide. So this decision raises the question, what happens to those who relied on that support?
Exactly. When an aid agency ceases to function, the gap left can be devastating, particularly for vulnerable communities. This also reflects a shift in prioritizing direct military interventions over diplomatic solutions, raising critical ethical questions about how we engage with the rest of the world.
Then we see on July 4th the signing of the One Big Beautiful Bill, which through a sweeping tax reduction greatly benefits the wealthy while stripping funds from renewable energy initiatives. The juxtaposition of this act with patriotic narratives raises important points about how policy can mask deeper intentions.
And by mid July, we shift again to the theme of international negotiation with the release of American prisoners in Venezuela in exchange for more than 250 Venezuelans. This commodification of human lives in negotiations seems stark, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It illustrates a realpolitik approach where human lives become pawns in larger political games. Who is negotiating and under what ethical frameworks are key questions here. This brings to light how diplomacy often operates beyond simple morality in favor of strategic interests.
And the situation escalates further in August, with deployment of the National Guard in Washington, D.C., declaring a crime emergency. This narrative of emergency can easily legitimize the use of military tactics in addressing social issues, which often deserve more thoughtful policy solutions.
And this militarization of response leads us to examine the broader implications. How does this affect community relationships with law enforcement? Isn't that worth a serious discussion about the kind of society we want to be?
As we move into September, there's a notable shift towards the cultural battlefront, with the timeline showing the blending of presidential communication, partisan media, and social media narratives. The president's social media presence increasingly blurs the lines between fact and speculation.
For example, the timeline mentions instances where a military strike glorifying one aspect leads to tragic casualties elsewhere, breaking the facade of precision in military action. It's an alarming reminder of the costs of war and how narratives can be manipulated.
And speaking of manipulation, let's not overlook how domestic policies are framed. In September, the designation of Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization raises flags about how dissenting voices could be categorized and potentially marginalized, affecting public discourse.
This categorization sets powerful precedents for policing and law enforcement, affecting who is protected and who feels targeted in our society. It speaks volumes about the ideological divides that underlie contemporary governance.
As we reach October and November, we see the culmination of these themes as war confronts domestic narratives. The complexity of responding to international crises is juxtaposed with internal discord, highlighting the messy intricacies of leadership in a time of turmoil.
On October 13th, a pivotal moment occurs when Hamas releases Israeli hostages, leading to further discussions about the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Similarly, the UN Security Council debates measures to manage this conflict under increasing scrutiny around the U.S.'s role in it.
And then we come back to domestic politics, where the demolition of the White House's East Wing for a ballroom stands as a metaphor for priorities in a politically charged environment. Why are we spending around our image at this time?
This action symbolizes the priorities at play, juxtaposed against the very real struggles citizens face daily. It makes us think about what comes next and how history will view this period. Each decision, policy, and reaction contributes to a layer of understanding around governance and the power dynamics that shape our world.
As we wrap up today's episode, it's clear that a single year can cast long shadows over future political landscapes. The themes of power wielded, protests raised, and consequences felt underscore how deeply interconnected our global and domestic systems are.
Indeed, it reminds us that every political action is not just a move on a chessboard, but a reflection that ripples through our societies, impacting lives, dignity, and the fundamental principles of governance. Thank you for joining us today in this exploration.
We encourage our listeners to reflect on the complexity of political decisions and the implications they hold not just for today, but for generations to come. Until next time, stay curious and engaged.